Almost every country in the world is in debt. The United States has surpassed $38 trillion. The European Union is around $14 trillion. And Japan carries more than $9 trillion. Even countries we call rich, like Saudi Arabia, Germany, or China, carry significant amounts of debt. This naturally brings up a question. Okay, everyone is in debt. But who is this debt owed to? Here's the strange part. A large portion of the debt is actually owed to the world itself, meaning its own institutions, funds, and investors. It's a bit unusual, but modern finance works this way. To understand this, we need to go back in time. In 1694, England was in the middle of a war and had run out of money. The king borrowed from merchants and promised to pay them continuous interest in return. This system worked so well that it eventually evolved into the bond system we know today. Other countries copied it, and thus national debt became one of the fundamental pillars of modern states. Centuries passed, and debt became one of the engines of the world economy. American banks, funds, and even the Fed buy U.S. bonds. Then, if necessary, the Fed buys these bonds back and creates new money. A portion of tax revenue goes toward paying interest on these bonds, and much of that interest ends up back in the hands of American investors. So in a way, the money circulates back inside the country. The same thing happens globally. Japan buys U.S. bonds. The U.S. lends money to other countries through the IMF. Europe provides loans to developing nations through the World Bank, and those nations then place their foreign exchange reserves back into Western bonds. Everyone is holding someone else's debt paper. It's like the entire world is sitting at a poker table with borrowed chips, and the only rule of the game is nobody leaves the table. Of course, there is also the invisible force behind this system, the markets and the central banks. Central banks create money as they buy bonds. Markets determine which country borrows cheaply and which one will pay a high price to survive. If confidence in a country drops, like in Greece, interest rates soar, the currency falls, and the economy goes through hard times. But underneath all of this lies a very simple truth. Governments do not have a plan to completely pay off their debt. They never did. Government debt is not like personal debt. It isn't paid off. It is gratuit, it is continually renewed. The state issues new debt to pay off the previous one. The real product being sold is the interest. That's how the system works. The world economy has adapted to this. Bonds are so important that if the U.S. tried to pay off its entire debt, the global economy would collapse. Banks and funds would lose their safe assets. This is why debt continues rhythmically. It beats like the heartbeat of capitalism. So when politicians say, we will erase the debt, we will zero out the budget, it's not very realistic. The real goal is not to eliminate debt, but to keep it manageable. However, there is another important point. Debt does not burden everyone equally. Interest income flows mostly to the wealthy and to institutions. Workers pay taxes, and those taxes go to pay interest. That's why global inequality rises together with global indebtedness. In other words, debt is not only a transfer between countries, it is also a transfer between classes. Today, debt is a tool used to keep the economy balanced. But if one day a crack forms in that balance, if confidence breaks, we remember how fragile the system really is. Because debt is always a promise, and some promises cannot be kept forever.